27. Valewind was a city unlike anything Cal had seen before. Its walls towered over him as he disembarked the airship and joined the checkpoint queue, a sheer black stone buttress that surrounded the city, keeping the building safe from the relentless torrent of the Vale's wind that even now roared behind him. Like teeth on a gear cog, it jutted out into the valley at several intervals, edges smoothed from years of relentless service. Ahead, underneath an enormous archway that served as entry for both passengers seeking to enter the city proper and airships looking to make berth, stood a full complement of prefects, sashes of green and brown running shoulder to hip across their silver armor. They barked orders at crew members returning home after a long voyage, and nobles who typically held themselves above the concerns of a lowly prefect. Do you think we're going to be able to get through? Obed asked the group. As subtly as she could, she pointed to a poster hanging on the wall inside the checkpoint. Three familiar faces stared back. Cal turned to Quentin. Can you get us through? Cal looked past Quentin looked past Cal at the prefects manning the checkpoint and then back at him. His expression shifted, settling on one that made it obvious what he thought of Cal's question. Sneaking through isn't really my forte. He gestured to Cal and Shay and then waved his hands toward the checkpoint. Can't you two stab your way through? Shay shook her head, lowering her voice enough that only the others could hear her. Too many people, too open, could turn ugly fast. We need a subtler way through. Ovette tapped Shay on the shoulder and pointed toward the front of the queue. Um, something's happening. At the front of the queue, a nobleman in a Yundian robe, with its blended shades of blue and white silk meant to represent the ever constant waves of the Yundish shoreline, showed a document at a prefect. The red of his cheeks grew brighter with each outburst, in stark contrast to the granite like scowl of the prefect. Don't you know who I am? I am a member of the Select Council. How dare you order me around like some common hollowborn? If I were you, I'd. The man jolted as the prefect, fed up with this charade, barked his interruption. All passengers are subject to inspection. The city of Valewind is under strict curfew by order of Lord Inquisitor Seus himself. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention. The prefect stepped forward, his sheer presence sapping some of the nobleman's bluster. I shall not repeat myself again. Present your documents for inspection. Now's our chance. While everyone is distracted, move up, Shay whispered. Cal grabbed Ovette's wrist and wove through the crowd. Most of the people were too enamored by the commotion ahead to notice anyone slipping by them. The nobleman stood in stunned silence for a moment. The red in his cheeks waned for a brief second, likely since he'd never been spoken to in such a manner before. For a moment, it looked as though he might comply. But then he reached for the prefect's shoulder, only to be slammed to the ground with enough force to knock the wind out of him. His companion shrieked as two other prefects hauled her and the nobleman into a nearby room. The door slammed shut, leaving only raised voices and grunting to fuel the imagination. Quentin, Cal whispered, you're up. Charm your way through. What? Me? Quentin replied, his tone a pitch higher than normal. Yes, go. Cal shoved him to the front. Forward, the remaining prefect barked, his eyes locked solely on Quentin. With a nervous cough, Quentin stepped forward. Ah, terrible business that. May we pass? His tone was still a pitch too high. Documents and business within the city. The prefect held out his hand toward Quentin. Ah, yes, of course. Here you are. Quentin reached inside his jacket and dropped the documents into the gauntleted hand of the prefect, as well as a small pile of coins. I trust everything is in order. The prefect closed his hand on the coin, placing them and the group's travel documents into a small pouch without taking so much as a second glance at them. We might need those. Why? You planning on leaving the city so soon? The prefect's hand shifted to a dagger at his belt. Uh, no, Quentin stammered. We'll be in the city for a good time. Good. I think I'll hold on to them for you. Seek me out when you want to leave, and we'll have another conversation about how you can earn them back. The prefect jerked his thumb to the right, in the direction of a large staircase that looked as though it led into the city. Now move. Quentin took a deep breath and then bowed his head. You are a gentleman beyond reproach, sir. The prefect didn't reply, but took the time to check the faces of everyone. As Cal passed, the prefect's arm shot out, grabbing his shoulder. He squinted as he stepped closer to Cal. You look familiar. The door to the side room slammed open, and one of the earlier prefects stepped out. This gate is closed for summary inspection. All remaining passengers are to line up against the wall, now. The prefect jerked his head toward the stairwell before joining his colleague in rounding up the unlucky crew members and passengers that remained. Not wasting a second, Cal and the others hurried up the stairwell and entered the city of Valewind. Inside the confines of Valewind's outer wall, the city looked very different than it had from the air. The city was split into three rings stacked on top of one another, with a central spiral staircase connecting each layer. The depths, the deal, and the mantle. Giant wall slits allowed shafts of natural light to brighten the many smaller staircases that crisscrossed between the levels, used mainly by the city's unending supply of craftsmen and traders. Stone, softened by the battering of wind, was in ample supply in the valley below, and the forest that hugged the mountain slopes provided wood that grew sturdy and strong. Compared to Igni and Yundis, Valewind was young, built atop the ruins of a much larger and older city. Wall carvings and faded murals half buried in the mountainside depicted scenes that Cal had no names for, in a language that he couldn't read, that no one could read, as far as he was aware. The airship had docked in the deal. The staircase leading from the dockyard opened out into a market that should have been filled with business and trade. Instead, vacant stalls sat silent before squat buildings no taller than 2 stories high. No sign of occupancy in any of them, some even bearing the remains of eviction notices and accusations of rebellion splattered in white paint. The midday sun cast an eerie light over the square. It glinted off the armor of the prefect patrols that stomped through the square as they eyed citizen stragglers with suspicion. Groups of people had been lined up against walls, their hands behind their heads, while prefects and inquisitors either questioned or accused them of colluding with known rebels. Children cried, clumped around the legs of protective adults, or draped over the still bodies of their parents. An inquisitor stood before a group of trembling citizens, marching back and forth with his chin tilted up in a display of disgust. Citizens are warned not to besmirch the great name of the Davan Empire. Any evidence of conspiring with the rebellion, however slight, shall be taken as proof of fact. Such a crime is punishable by imprisonment. Any who resist shall be met with lethal force. What happened here? Cal asked, his throat tightening with every breath. He was unable to tear his eyes away from every group they passed. You did, Quentin replied. Cal looked at Quentin in a mix of anger and shock. Valewood has always been a harsh city, he continued. And now that you have broken a second chain, the Empire fears what you will do with the third. He glanced up toward Valewind's chain. It speared the city at an odd angle before plunging into the valley below. Barkus had once talked about the folly of the Valewind cell, how they'd attempted to destroy the point where the chain met the valley, seemingly emboldened by the actions of a young Igni orphan. The attempt had ended in a massacre and triggered a state of constant martial law, effectively ending the Valen rebellion. Valewind was supposed to be a port of safety for Cal and the others. It was never the intention to stick around, but at least they could have gotten their bearings before making the next decision. Now, with the city on full lockdown, just getting from one side to the other seemed an impossible task. Cal's attention snapped to a group of citizens that had been pushed up against the wall by prefects. One such citizen bolted as soon as the opportunity presented itself, wailing in fear as he ran on clumsy footsteps. The presiding inquisitor regarded the man for a second and then signaled to two rooftop prefects. Their brands glowed before their gift transferred into the barrels of their gift arms. With a loud crack, the prefects unleashed two red-hot blasts that threw the runner to the floor, a pained gulp the only sound he made before lying motionless on the stone. Thin wisps of smoke rose from two black holes in his back. "We need to get out of here," Shay whispered, urging the others to tear their gazes away from the scene. "How much further to the hideout?" Quentin asked. "It's not far," Shay added, an unsure expression on her face. "It's been a while since I came to the city, but I think I can." "You, citizens," the Inquisitor called, pointing his finger in the direction of Cal and the others. "What business do you have on these streets?" Everyone but Cal froze. In a flash, he drew the blade shard and dagger and pushed into the backs of his companions. "Run!" With Shay at the lead, they plunged into the narrow alleyways that sprawled out from the main market square. Sharp corners and connecting passages made Valewind streets a maze. Cal soon lost his bearings, trusting Shay's lead while they took corners at speed. His constant checking over his shoulder slowed him down somewhat, but it at least informed him that the pursuing Inquisitors had picked up a second group of prefects, smaller than the first. Cal's heart sank as he rounded the final corner and came face to face with a dead end. A 12-foot wall lined with nasty iron spikes stood before them all. Climbable, but it would take some longer than others. Shay pushed Ovette toward the wall. "Quentin, help her!" Cal didn't expect Quentin to obey, but he did. His hands boosted Ovette up, and she scrambled unsteadily up the wall. "Get down on the ground, now!" The group's pursuers advanced around the corner, their swords raised and brands glowing. "I said get down!" The Inquisitor at the head of the group barked. Cal backed toward the wall, fingers tight around his weapons. Shay stood by his side, drawing her dagger and summoning a shadowy twin in her other hand. "Perhaps we ought to do as they say," Quentin suggested, resting his hand on Cal's shoulder. Pain rocked through Cal's body, and he collapsed to one knee. His head thumped with noise. A buzzing sound rose to a squeal so loud it made it difficult to see. The blade shard fell from his grip and hit the floor with a dull clang. "Enough of this! Seize them!" "No, wait!" Shay stepped in front of the group, dropping her dagger and the illusion. "I'm the daughter of Barkus Aurelian, the leader of the Yundis Rebellion. Let them go, and I'll come quietly." Her words poured out of her, as if racing the Inquisitor's growing fury. The Inquisitor regarded Shay for a moment, and then threw his head back in laughter. A mirthless laugh of absolute control that sent a shiver down Cal's spine. Cal strained to look up at Shay. The buzzing between his ears intensified as the Inquisitor stepped closer and lifted Shay's chin with the tip of his blade. You and your kind deserve nothing more than death, filthy scum. With a flick of his wrist, the blade nicked Shay's cheek. Cal forced himself up despite his body's sudden weight. He wobbled on his legs, barely able to make out the chuckles from behind the Inquisitor. Chuckles that dropped into strangled gurgles as the blades from the second prefect squad plunged into their backs. The Inquisitor spun, his eyes wide with fury as he bellowed curses against this group of apparent traitors. Shay darted forward, jammed her knee into the Inquisitor's spine, and wrenched his head back. The Inquisitor's chest jerked forward with a crunch, and he dropped to the floor, his neck bent at an impossible angle. Without saying a word, the leader of the traitorous prefects removed their helmet. He shook his wash of blond hair, clumped together with sweat, and tucked the helmet under his side.
Took you long enough. I was beginning to think you weren't coming.
Jord! Shay cried, crossing the gap between them and throwing her arms around him in a strangling hug. Jord chuckled as she squeezed and did her the courtesy of not telling that he was struggling for breath. The other prefects each offered Shay a respectful nod as they too dehelmed. For the first time in far too long, Shay's eyes lit up with genuine joy. Jord's smile faded as his gaze passed to Cal. He rushed forward and dropped to one knee, catching Cal as he stumbled.
Cal, what's wrong?
Ovette placed her hand on Cal's shoulder and whispered something into his ear. Her words felt too far away to be understood, but a soothing warmth followed each word. It trickled through his limbs, and the weight of his body fell away, like taking off drenched clothing. He felt the rough cloth of her coin pouch as she placed it in his hand again. The buzzing in his head dulled to a whisper once more as he ran his thumb over the tattered material. Ovette's voice came in clearer, each one delivered like a dropped pebble in a pond.
Cal?
Jord asked again. Cal shook off the last remnants of dizziness and pushed to his feet. He blinked back at his friend, who stood staring at him with concern painted across his face in broad strokes. Cal averted his gaze, embarrassed that Jord had seen him in such a weakened state. Jord opened his mouth to say something, but his eyes flickered toward Ovette. It took him a second, but recognition soon stole away his concern.
Oh, that, he blurted. You're alive.
His hands gripped her shoulders, his eyes darting between hers, as if to check she was real. Hello, Jord, Ovette replied with a hint of joy. Jord pulled her in close, embraced her. Ovette huffed as some of the wind was knocked out of her, but she didn't pull away. Breaking the hug, Jord held her at arm's length again.
If I'd known you were alive, if we thought that, well, we would have come for you.
Ovette removed Jord's hands from her shoulders. It's all right, Jord. She eyed the disguised rebels behind him. Do you have a safe place nearby? I don't think we're safe out in the open.
Of course, Jord replied. It's lucky we found you all.
He trailed off as his eyes fell upon Quentin, who had been staying silent at the back. Animated by the sudden attention, Quentin fell into his usual performative display, stepping forward with his arms wide open in a readied embrace. Jord, I've missed you.
We need to get everyone off the streets,
Jord cut in, turning his attention to Shay. Cal studied the faces of Jord's companions. One of them he'd seen in the Eunice hideout a few times, but the other was a stranger. A sudden pang of worry rooted itself in his chest. Jord, where's Artie? George dropped his head.
He's been captured by the Inquisitors.
What?
It's not safe to talk here.
George exclaimed.
We can discuss everything once we're back at the hideout. Come on.
The group followed George and the disguised rebels down identical alleyways, avoiding prefect patrols. Cal's worry crystallized into a knot as he wondered what had happened to Artie, and if his friend were still alive. An abandoned alehouse that sat far from the main bustle of the marketplace, but still within the confines of the city's middle ring, now served as the desperate refuge for the remnants of the Valewind Rebellion. George shouldered through the hideout's door, startling those inside. Wind whistled through wall gaps, and more than a few of the space's residents tugged at the corner of frayed blankets. Charming, Quentin chattered, eyeing a woman's blanket with envy. I wonder how long it will take for this one to be discovered. He ambled over to a table, wiping its dusty surface with a huff before sitting down. The few rebels inside shot wary glances at the newcomers, some staring at Jord, waiting for his explanation. Picking up on the discomfort in the room, he gestured for Shay to step forward, clasping both hands on her shoulders.
Friends, this is Shay Aurelian, Marcus Aurelian's daughter, former leader of the Undicell.
Murmurs trickled through the room at the mention of Barkis, and it seemed as though the introduction was enough for everyone to lower their guard. Cal caught Jord's eyes and nodded, grateful that Jord had omitted his and Ovette's names. A disheveled woman dropped her blanket to the floor to clasp Shay's hands. Cal watched, noting the way his companion's jaw tightened, but said nothing. Not missing a beat, Quentin scooped up the discarded blanket and wrapped it around himself, tugging at the stains. Your father was a hero to us, the woman said, her voice soft but firm. The lines that surrounded the woman's eyes deepened along with her smile, and she led Shay over to the seat she'd just been occupying. Many of us here owe him our lives. Shay nodded in response, but her pursed lips betrayed how she really felt. Cal flashed back to their boat conversation, how Barkis had been more of a rebel than a father, and the gaping hole Shay felt she had to fill now that he was gone. The other rebels in the room inclined their heads in respect, yet their expressions were drawn with exhaustion and defeat. The knot in Cal's stomach hadn't abated, and the absence of one particular face among this smattering of newfound allies made it tighten. Jord, Cal said, turning a few heads his way. What happened to Artie? Jord let out a heavy sigh and motioned for Cal to come closer.
A few days ago, the Inquisitors raided another hideout. Artie was there.
Where is he now? Cal's panic quickened his words.
He is being held in the market square, not far from where I found you.
Jord gestured to the two disfigured rebels, one a hunched man with a thick gray beard, the other a younger lad with patchy stubble.
This is all I could muster to free him.
Cal's chest clenched. It didn't take long for him to decide his next course of action. He squeezed Jord's shoulder before addressing Shay. Think you can get us back to the market? Shay met his gaze. Of course. Ready to go when you are. Are you sure you're up for this, Cal? Ovette stepped forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had grown in the room. Cal took a second to answer. I'm not going to abandon him. He'd do the same for me. Okay, then I'm coming with you, Ovette said, just in case. Jord let out a deep, long breath, his shoulders sagging as if a tremendous weight had just been lifted.
It's a relief having you all back. The Inquisitors are getting closer to this hideout every day. I don't know what to do.
Shame flashed through his expression as he dropped his head. It had only been a few days since Cal had seen his friend, but Jord looked older, more ragged than he remembered. Shay spoke before Cal had the chance. It's okay. You've done more than enough. Is this the only hideout you have left? Quentin chimed in. Jord closed his eyes, his nostrils flaring.
No. My family has a storehouse near one of the tradesmen's stairwells.
His tone carried little emotion.
The plan was to leave the city and head down into the valley. If we can get to the depths, we should be fine.
Shay scanned the room, her gaze sharp and commanding. Okay, she announced. Once we get Artie, we'll meet at the entrance to the depth stairwell. Everyone agreed? A nod of a chorus of nods followed. Great. Let's get moving, people. Cal breathed deep and threw back his shoulders as he followed Shay through the winding back streets of the deal. His body felt stiff from his most recent bout with the Whispers, but his determination to save Artie pushed through his fear of it happening again. Over the years, Artie had been one of the few people he could call a genuine friend, having treated him like any other giftling. No disgust, no fear, no pity. With George's dwindling forces, Cal had little choice but to do everything in his power to help. Or so he told himself. Voices echoed from every direction as the group snuck forward. Prefects barking orders, citizens whimpering in fear. Not being able to intervene pained Cal. Each ignored plea twisted his gut. He tried to close his heart to their suffering. He tried, and failed. Ovette jerked her head toward every cry for help, wincing at every sign and sound of what Daven Rule was really like. There's nothing we can do for them right now, Cal whispered, trying his best to sound comforting and practical all at once. The rim of tears around her eyes tugged at his heart. He knew she understood, but that didn't make things any easier for either of them. Only Shay seemed to hold her composure, halting their progress on more than one occasion to watch abuses of power with stone-faced calm. But Cal knew otherwise. The slight tug at the corner of her mouth, the way her heel bounced slowly as she squatted down. Her restraint was costing her dearly. Before long, the group reached the edge of the central platform that served as the main space for the deal. It was an enormous circular market with compact stone buildings similar to the ones Cal had seen near the dockyard checkpoint, although these particular buildings were well maintained. Several large streets, wide enough for bustling crowds to meander along back and forth, ran off at different points like spokes on a wagon wheel. Balewind's chains speared the market's middle, the stone ceiling and floor built around the chain links as they descended through the city at an angle. Cal breathed deep as he laid his eyes on the pulsing runes of the chain. He readied himself for the onslaught of whispers, but nothing came. Ovette touched his hand, and he shook his head, expressing his lack of discomfort. She nodded, then pointed to her coin pouch at his neck. He pulled it free and held tight, ready. Do you see him? Shay asked, scanning the crowd in front of them. Before them, a sporadic crowd of Valens had amassed around a makeshift gallows, erected in haste if the boxes supporting the sides were any sort of indicator. Atop the gallows stood two inquisitors, one with broad, muscle-coiled arms holding a bloodied greatsword, the other a slight man with long, greasy hair and beady eyes that regarded the crowd with disgust. Both wore similar black leathers, the typical golden spire embroidered rather than emblazoned. The slight inquisitor raised his hand to draw attention, silencing the crowd beneath him. Good citizens of Valewind, he orated, bear witness to those among you who have thrown their lot in with traitors. The crowd hung on his every word. Many fidgeted as they stood and listened, the air filled with a fragile tension, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. There he is, Shay exclaimed, pointing at a small group of collared giftlings, Artie kneeling among them. Cal's breath hitched in his throat as he saw the state of his friend. The bruise that covered half of Artie's face was clear even from a distance, as was the dark red stain that had dried on one side of his shirt. Not a fatal wound, but one that would leave a nasty scar all the same. Shay turned to Cal, looking awkward as she considered the right way to ask her question. Cal, do you hear anything? Any voices? Shame rippled through him as Shay studied his expression. She meant well, and her concern was valid, but the words still cut. He let go of the breath he'd been holding since looking at Artie and answered, I'm fine. I'm in control. Shay nodded, turning her attention back to Artie. We'll need to do this fast. She'd already drawn one of her daggers and coalesced her shadows into the shape of another. Maybe wait until his speech is finished? What about the others? Cal asked. We can't just leave them to the Inquisitors. I know, Cal. I know. Shay bit back. Her brow creased as she shifted through ideas in her head. She wanted to save everyone, that was clear, but the situation was grim. The open square offered little cover. There was no way they could get to Artie without drawing attention to themselves. And with the crowd hanging on every word the Slight Inquisitor spoke, any rescue would spark chaos. In situations like these, things could get ugly fast. In Cal's experience, that usually meant one thing: not everyone was going to make it out alive. Cal turned to check on Ovette, but his words of caution died in his mouth. Her face had gone pale, lips trembling as her gaze locked onto a young woman, wailing as a prefect dragged her up the gallows steps. The woman's torn servant dress hinted at former finery, and she looked familiar, but Cal was having trouble placing her. A face he'd seen in passing, maybe? The slight inquisitor took a fistful of the woman's hair and held her up before the crowd. This woman has been found guilty of treason of the highest order. She taints the Uden name with her filth, with her lies. No, no, I didn't do anything. I served the Lord Inquisitor well, I swear, she cried. Ovette stood frozen, shock and terror locking her limbs. Liar! The Inquisitor struck the woman across the face, sending her sprawling. Your maledictions are not welcome here. These are good people, loyal people, people who wish to see your kind eradicated from this city. For while your kind lives, they are in peril. His words heightened the tension in the crowd. Several of its members stepped forward and raised their fists in anger, screaming, Traitor, you brought death to her door. You're the reason she's no longer with us. Lord, see us, protect us from filth like you. The woman sobbed and clawed at the boot of the slight inquisitor. Please, please, I beg you. I served the matriarch. I was her faithful servant. Please. He grimaced, as if something dirty and tainted were touching his clothing. And where is your matriarch now? He kicked the woman away, and a jeer swept through the crowd. Killed by your rebellion. He opened his arms to address the crowd. She claims to have served faithfully, to have been the model citizen, but on her watch, murderers broke into the citadel and cut down your matriarch, slaying her in the very fortress she called home. The jeers from the crowd intensified. The Inquisitor was riling up this mob into a murderous frenzy. Cal, go, now, Shay hissed. Your judgment has been decided, traitor. The crowd roared in agreement. and the slight Inquisitor signaled to his broader companion.
Death!
The broad Inquisitor made a point to drag the tip of his greatsword across the wooden platform, sending small splinters into the air as he swung it up over his head. No! Ovette screamed and rushed forward. White gift fire erupted from her hands, slamming into the broad Inquisitor. He screamed as the flames melted his armor and bubbled his skin. Silence fell over the square. All eyes turned to Ovette, who had the same white gift fire wreathing her arms. Clara, run! She shouted. The crowd scattered as Ovette's fire twisted and leaped toward the slight Inquisitor. He dove off the wooden platform and into the screaming mob. Cal watched in awe as the flames coiled around the wooden platform like a snake. Ovette's face was twisted with anger and effort. He turned to Shay, shouldered by a member of the crowd scared for their life. Shay, get Artie! What are you going to do? She yelled back. Cal pushed and shoved his way through the crowd as he replied, What do you think? Shay sprinted for Artie and the other bound prisoners, while Cal drew his blade shard and charged two prefects advancing behind Ovette. He skewered the first through the back and, with shocking ease, lifted him over his head. The prefect's pained wail died with a wet gurgle as Cal twisted the shard and yanked it free mid-throw. The second prefect drove a shallow cut into Cal's shoulder. The padding in his cloak had absorbed most of the strike, but the wound still stung. It was sensation enough to bring Cal back into the fight. He backed up a few more steps and drew his dagger. His opponent's swing came in wild, one born of desperation rather than practice or discipline. Cal feinted left, then pirouetted to his right, bringing both blade shard and dagger up one after the other in quick succession, just like Shay had done to him several times during their sparring sessions. Her raw speed had always made it difficult for him to counter. His dagger clashed against the prefect's sword, the blades locking at the hilt. Cal braced and took a step back, allowing his opponent to believe they had the upper hand. The prefect's panicked expression hardened into a grimace as, sure enough, he took the bait and pushed forward, bringing the edge of his blade closer to Cal's face. At the last moment, Cal twisted his body, stepping to the side as the prefect stumbled past him. In one fluid motion, Cal thrust the blade shard forward, driving the tip between the prefect's helmet and chest plate. Blood fountained onto the shard, and the prefect's shoulders crumpled, his head holding for a moment before falling limp. A pulse of satisfaction warmed Cal. As he stared down at the glowing red pool below his defeated opponent, something urged him to strike again. A shrill cry shocked Cal out of his momentary trance. No! Get away from me! Cal jerked his head toward the noise. Ovette was advancing on a terrified Clara, her gift fire gone, the corpse of the slight Inquisitor smoldering next to her. Clara, it's okay. They can't hurt you anymore. No, you're a monster! Clara found an ounce of courage and scrambled into the remnants of the fleeing crowd, disappearing from sight. Ovette stood frozen in place, her hands outstretched, eyes staring at where her friend had just been. Cal sheathed his blades and made his way toward her. Movement flickered in the corner of his eye, a figure on the nearby rooftop raising a long rune-carved weapon, taking aim. Ovette! He broke into a sprint, crossing the market square in the blink of an eye. His heart hammered in his chest, and the world fell away as he locked onto her. The steps to the raised platform loomed ahead, and with one final burst of speed, he scaled them in a single leap. He threw himself at Ovette, his hands barely gripping her shoulders before a deafening crack ripped through the air. Heat blossomed between his shoulder blades, a searing rush that quickly morphed into a throbbing numbness. Something had happened, but his mind struggled to catch up. Ovette's scream cut through the fog, but it was too late. He staggered forward, his legs buckling before he dropped from the platform to the hard stone below. The impact hawked up a cup of bright arterial blood. He tried to speak, to say something, but his breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening with a painful pinch, as if the air itself had been forced out of him. The distant cry of a man ended with a bone-cracking thud. Ovette's arms wrapped around him, cradling his head in her lap. She spoke, but her words came through muffled, her voice echoing as though from far away. Shay and Artie's faces swam into view, their features blurry before the edges of his vision faded to black.